Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking you through one of the other anthology texts called Explorers or Boys Messing Around. So with all of the anthologies, you need to understand the purpose, audience and form. So for this one, the purpose is to inform and to entertain. It isn't just strictly informative because we remember we have that element of the writer's bias, which is trying to convince us that these men are foolish and quite reckless. The audience is to taxpayers. It signals that in the title, which I will talk through. And then the form of it is a newspaper article. So for each of the anthologies, it's important to know the types of questions that could come up, the key themes for each of them, and how to prepare for that. As I say, just knowing the extracts really well, knowing quotations, techniques that are in them, that is all well and good, but you need to know how to craft your response to an answer. So, okay, some of the key themes are the incompetence of the men, have this theme of bias and their recklessness. We also have the bravery of the Coast Guards, which you could consider. So the question that I'm going to focus on to show you how to structure a response is, how does the writer use language and structure to present Steve Brooks and Quinton Smith? So the key points I would focus on for those 12 marks, aim to write 3 paragraphs with 3 separate points. You don't want to write 3 paragraphs about the men's incompetence because you might not have enough quotations to use. It might end up becoming very repetitive. So instead, try and have a range of ways to respond to that question. So different ways in which the men are presented. So these are my 3 points here that I've color coded, but you could focus on different ones to that as well. So number 1, the men are presented as incompetent and reckless. Number 2, the men's incompetence is juxtaposed to the bravery and skill of the Coast Guards. And next one, which is different and perhaps more perceptive, of a point to focus on is how, although the men, yes, are perhaps reckless where it's described, it seems to present the men as if they're amateurs and don't know what they're doing, where they are actually very skilled explorers. But the way in which it's written is manipulative. So that isn't our assumption as we read it. Okay, so how you could break this down. So these are going to be the 3 key paragraphs, and within that, the quotations that I've chosen to focus on and the analysis to go with that. Bear in mind as well, when you are planning your response to question 4, or for many of the questions, especially those high mark ones, it is really important to plan. And when you do your plan, to check that you have looked at language and structure. If you only focus on language or you only focus on structure, then the marks in which you get will be limited. Okay, so for paragraph 1, the one about the men being reckless and childlike. So we can even consider the title of the newspaper article that immediately sets a cynical and sarcastic tone by referring to them as boy explorers or boys messing around. Either way, the taxpayers get rescue bill. The article is a biased account of the helicopter accident, which present these experienced explorers as infantile meaning childish, because the word boys has connotations of childishness and immaturity. So that is ironic given how experienced these men are. They are skilled adventurers, but by referring to them as boys and saying the word messing, that immediately sets the tone and influences us as readers to believe that they are foolish. The mention of taxpayer in the headline immediately positions the reader against these men and paints them as reckless. And their reckless decisions is only going to lead to the expense of others, it coming out of a taxpayer's pocket. So as a taxpayer reading that, they're immediately going to ridicule and criticize these men. And that is a deliberate choice that the reporter has done. The verb messing, again in the title, suggests that they are careless and foolish. In sense, messing around, it's what you would maybe say about children. And we have these euphemisms. Remember, a euphemism is a nice way to say something that could be harsh. So rather than saying dead, we could say passed away, for instance. The adventure and rescue mission is described as a farce. A farce is something that's it's a bit of a joke, a bit of a mockery of something. And the drama. So that again, all of these points and quotations that I've chosen are all used to emphasize the immaturity and incompetence of the adventurers. So for the second paragraph, what I've chosen to focus on is to think about the incompetence of the men versus the skill of the Coast Guards and why that is being juxtaposed so starkly. So to describe the Navy, the Coast Guards, it uses these strong action verbs such as deciphered, steaming towards, this sense of urgency and determination, and dispatched. So we have that in contrast to the men who are described as scrambling, which sounds chaotic and confused, vulnerable, and it talks about them being plucked from the sea, which again is like their vulnerability, and also has connotations of weakness. So the reporter has, as I said, juxtaposed the two to make the men seem even more reckless and incompetent and vulnerable and relying on others to jump in and support them, putting themselves in danger, but also the taxpayer out of money. Where it's, I mean, a Coast Guard's job is to go and save someone, but it's making them to be the heroes, and rather than focusing on this crash and the danger that Steve Brooks and Quinton Smith could be in, it says quite negative, the portrayal of them. Okay, then the third paragraph that you could focus on would be about undermining the skill of the explorers. So it very much starts by talking about the stupidity of the men. And there's only the small section in the middle where it actually gives us some of their backstory. And we find out that they're pilots, that one of them has been flying since he was 5 years old. So they are actually incredibly experienced. And despite this accident that they've had, in all that time, it's the first time that something like this has happened. But in terms of the structure of the article, that part about their expertise is only mentioned briefly in the middle of the article. Other than that, it's all about centering on their stupidity, which again is deliberate. So there's this sarcastic tone where it says the experts questioned the wisdom of these men. And you could question, well, who are these experts? Because the explorers themselves are experts, but that's never really acknowledged. And it is quite deliberate that this writer has chosen to include the quotations of an expert, but not actually give Brooks and Smith their own voice. There is no personal quote from those two men used, because why would she? If the woman writing this is trying to ridicule them, she's silencing them, and instead is using another expert opinion to question what they did. It says about why would they use that helicopter? Did they know what they were doing? It serves her purpose, which is to present them in the incompetent way she wants to. And this is further empathized by the metaphor, they'll have their bottoms kicked, which is, they're talking about grown men who are pilots, as if they are badly behaved children. So although there is elements in the article which is quite humorous and light-hearted, it is also incredibly patronizing. I mean, imagine the men's reaction when they read this article in the way in which they've been presented. So consider the shift in focus. The beginning is all about their incompetence. It ridicules the rescue, and it is only briefly in the middle where it mentions the men's qualifications. And it says that one of them won the world freestyle helicopter flying competition. So that tells us they are incredibly experienced, they're brave to go out on these adventures. And someone else could write this article and present them as very inspiring. So that's what you need to consider. What is the writer's intention, and how are we to perceive it as readers? What intended effect did they want to have on us? The focus, however, is very quickly directed back to their failure with very patronizing descriptions. Remember that the purpose of newspapers is it's to sell them. And this story isn't just strictly factual. To a degree, it has been sensationalized to perhaps make it more interesting. Okay, so I hope that that helps. On the next slide, there is a model answer, which I'm not going to read through. You can read it yourself, but I'm just going to leave it a couple of seconds there so you can pause it and read it through on the video. Okay, good luck and happy revision, everyone.